An Oklahoma child advocacy expert says the hunger problem in Oklahoma is not getting better. The governor recently said no to federal money that would have helped feed some of those kids. In this morning's The Hot Seat, Scott Mitchell explains which resources are needed.
Hello and welcome to Hot Seat. I'm Scott Mitchell with Joe Dorman, the CEO of Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy, OICA. Good to have you this morning, Joe.
It's good to see you, sir.
Let's talk about hungry people. There is a controversy that's been going on for a few days since the governor decided he wasn't going to accept a federal program. But let's start with the decision. What was it the governor said no to, and why is it important?
Well, thank you for bringing this topic up. There was an opportunity for the state to receive federal funding. It was offered to every state. A few states have turned it down. The amount that would have come to Oklahoma would have been about $48 million, and it would have broken down to about $40 for families to feed their kids during the summer months. During those 3 months, children don't have access to school feeding programs like they do during the school year, where they can receive breakfast and lunches. And so the thought was to model this plan after what worked in the pandemic by giving families an EBT card. It's basically a card where they have funds where they can go spend at the local grocery store. That way they would have those meals at home, and they could provide the food to those kids. Studies have shown that SNAP, when they use that program, it's 9 times more likely to feed families than if they're counting on feeding in a congregate feeding center or some other type of place where they go. Just because a lot of the kids during the summer, they don't have the ability to get to a site, or the parents are working and they can't travel to a site. So this funding would have been tremendous as far as reducing the hunger levels of what we see with kids in the state.
Can you give us some data, some context as to how bad the hunger problem is in Oklahoma, and specifically more in the lane that you work in every day, which is children?
Absolutely. What we're looking at in Oklahoma is higher than the national average when it comes to poverty. We're one of the poorest states in the nation when you look at the breakdown. And a lot of people just don't simply realize how poor people are out there that are struggling. We're looking at about 1 in 5 kids is food insecure. That doesn't mean that they don't have access to a high quality, nutritious meal. That means they don't have access to food. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. And a lot of people are just simply unaware or ignorant to that fact. We've got to do a better job of making sure that these resources do get out to the kids. One of the complaints that we heard was that nonprofits or churches should step up and do the funding for this. Well, everyone is struggling. We have politicians that are claiming inflation is very high and it's a large problem. And I agree with that. People are struggling, but you can't say that on one hand, and then on the other hand say, well, we shouldn't provide resources to these families to make ends meet. A family of 4, the poverty level is about $30,000. And when you got both parents working minimum wage jobs, it's tough to put food on the table when you're paying rent, you're paying insurance, you're paying other costs. These families are struggling. We've got 1 in 5 kids in the state, as I said, that are food insecure. And these funds would go to help them and make sure that they get food on the table so they're not going hungry. We've had a strong and healthy conversation dealing with the criminal justice reform, but a lot of that's been directed at adults and women in particular. We haven't looked at issues that can help prevent these kids from going into the correction system in the beginning. Let's look at ways that we can try and get the recidivism rate down earlier in an age where these kids are not going into OJA and then therefore turning that into a pipeline to prison, whereas when they turn adults, they get sent to the Department of Corrections. I've often said the Department of Corrections is a misnomer. We're not correcting any behavior in the Department of Corrections. We're simply locking people up. It's gotten better, but we've got to do a much better job, and that means putting these resources at the OJA level to make sure these kids aren't going into the system. The partners that work with OJA and youth services, looking at the metrics to see where they're delivering and helping keep these kids out of trouble. If they've been in once, make sure they don't come back. There are a lot of ways that we can improve these things, and we certainly want to encourage lawmakers to look at those options.
Joe Dorman is the CEO of Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy. Joe, thanks for being with us. We'll be watching the legislative session to see how your group fits in once you get done. Good luck.
I appreciate that. And I do want to say a reminder, with the way things are right now, with what we're seeing with the poverty levels, with our state having 15% or so poverty, make a donation if you have the means to a local food bank. Let's make sure that we're feeding these kids.
Thanks very much for being here. And thanks for watching Hot Seat. See this again at news9.com and news on6.com, and follow me at Mitchell Talks on my socials.